All right. Okay. Well, welcome everyone. Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Talks with V. This evening we are streaming live with the HBCU Lounge Network, and our topic is frenemies. So I know y'all all excited about this topic, but before we get too far in, I want to go ahead and remind you, if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, please go ahead and subscribe to the HBCU Lounge Network. And if you have a YouTube account, log into your account so that you can join the chat with us. We love to see you all participating in the chat and leaving your feedback. And so go ahead and do that now. And also, share the link. Share the link. There's so many people who can benefit from this conversation tonight. And I'm very excited about it. So go ahead and share the link. Go ahead. Very easy to share. um, and so, without further ado, I'd love to introduce my lovely guest. Thank you, all three of you, for being here with me tonight to cover this topic. And first, we will start with Dr. Diana, who is a friend of the show. Dr. Diana, please tell the people who you are and what you do and how long you've been in the industry.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Diona. I'm actually a psychologist working out of South Florida. My sister, Dr. Joe, and I, who's also a psychologist, opened a practice in 2020 during the pandemic just because we noticed that there was a gap when it came to ensuring that our community got the help that they needed, especially when it came to mental health services that were culturally competent. So we decided to open our practice as well as our organization, the Mental Health Sisters, so that we could empower women, but especially women in our community. I'm so glad to be here tonight, and I'm looking forward to discussing this topic with you all.
Awesome, awesome. And next we have Lavanya from Texas.
Hello, everyone. Hey, Boo Thangs. It's Lavanya from Texas. I am a author. I am a counselor, and most importantly, I'm a fellow journeyer. So I hold a master's in rehabilitation counseling psychology, and I've been in the counseling industry for about 17 years. I recently submitted and finished the paperwork for my LPCA. So now I am in the in Texas. It's you have to do the internship hours. So I'm in that right now, doing the internship hours for that. But I've been a counselor for 17 years, and just super excited about being here. I focus on working with women and overcoming trauma issues, healing their hearts, healing trust issues, as well as becoming the love that they've been looking for. So I support women in healing their dysfunctional patterns and fixing their picker, which means basically we have the relationship that we have sometimes because we're picking and we're choosing those relationships. So figuring out how we can stop picking the wrong relationships, and stop allowing our dysfunction to limit our potential. So I'm super excited about this as well. I have 4 books, 4 Amazon best-selling books, and I'm working on 2 more on loving your life as a single as you prepare for whatever else God has for you. So thank you so much for having us.
Good. Awesome. Thank you so much. And Miss Sierra Hillman.
Hi, family. My name is Sierra Hillsman, licensed professional counselor, certified clinical trauma professional, and certified anger management specialist, born and raised in South Florida, but currently living in Atlanta, licensed in the state of Georgia as well in the state of Maryland. And my specialties include life transitions and financial wellness. I teach people how to look at themselves from the whole person. We understand that there are so many different dimensions and so many different domains that we operate out of. And so making sure that you're tending to your emotional wellness as well as all those other aspects of your life.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, ladies, for being here. Got some amazing guests, and I know that oh my gosh, this topic, I've heard so much just since I've discussed that I would be having it. And everybody's got their horror stories. And then there's just some that are just excited about the topic just to learn, more. And I know I'm excited about learning more about this topic as well. And so first, we love to go ahead and discuss the description or the definition of whatever it is that we're covering. So I'm going to go ahead and read that definition of frenemies for those who think that they may have one or they don't know what a frenemy is. So a definition of a frenemy is a person who is or pretends to be a friend who is also in some way an enemy or rival. Okay. Another definition, I think it's kind of more, this one kind of to me relates to kind of like in your youth, but hey, it says frenemies are friends and or peers who are mean to others. Toxic friendships are social relationships that make preteens and teenagers feel bad about themselves. I mean, you might have a friend that does that in your 30s. So I've had that experience. So first, I would like to start and ask the ladies if you guys can give an example of a frenemy, personal example or something that you've learned along the way. And so I'll go ahead with Sierra.
Yeah, so a frenemy is an individual, like you mentioned, who pretends to hold that friendship relationship, but has these underlying intentions that are either covert or overt. And so what that looks like is manipulation, underbiting, talking behind another person's back, pretending to show up, but not showing up in the fullness of what a true friend looks like. And it's very interesting because even when you're navigating these relationships, it's important for individuals to outline and clarify their goals in friendships. But when it's very vague, when you haven't set intention when it comes to your friendships, it's easy for individuals to not show up in the manner that you need them to show up for. So you often find individuals staying in these relationships due to codependency or just because they see that there's some level of benefit to them. So that's how I would describe a frenemy.
Okay. All right. And Lavanya, I knew.
Yeah.
I would love to hear it.
So, as Sierra said, I mean, that's exactly what a frenemy is. It's a person that either covertly or overtly, like a person who is consciously doing this, or a person who may not even consciously know that they're in a rivalry or a competition with you. So a frenemy can be someone that is physically close, but emotionally far. So it's a person that may not necessarily have your best interests at heart, but can't really get to the root of why. So I think that that's really important to kind of understand too, because sometimes we have outright enemies, right? And then we have frenemies, which is a person who is disguised as a friend. But it's important to understand that sometimes that person does not even know where the competition started or where the rivalry started, or doesn't even know that they're doing that. So while I have a little bit of empathy for frenemy, there's no excuse for it. But I definitely can see how a person who's insecure in themselves, a person who is insecure in where they are in life, or a person that may have been in your life for a long time and sees things in your life that's changing and they feel like they're left out, then they become a friend. They can become a frenemy out of fear of being left out, or fear of you moving further ahead in the line and them being left behind. And so it's a person that you feel like you may be in competition with, but you've never signed up for the competition and you're trying in some way to let them win so that you can get out. Like, I just want to, like, how do I win? How do I get out? Right. And but it you can't kind of figure out where it starts or where it ends kind of aspect. And it can be several different ways of it, of a person who gives you some positive and then gives you some negative. So it's kind of like they feel like they're on your side sometimes, but then they make comments. And then it could be someone that's been in your life for so long, or someone that has your same bloodline, right? And you feel like you're obligated to keep that relationship open with that person, but that person doesn't necessarily have your best interests at heart.
Yeah, totally. All of that. And Dr. Diona, what about you? You have any examples or even personal examples of experienced a frenemy?
I mean, I definitely think that both Sierra and Lavanya made excellent points when it comes to what a frenemy is. When it comes to a personal example, I would just say that A frenemy is the person you have in your circle who exhibits both friendly and negative characteristics and qualities.
Mhm.
So it can make it very difficult to know where that person truly stands. So, for example,
Right.
if I have a friend who is just obviously toxic, it's very easy to say, you know what, I'm cutting him off, I'm cutting her off. Like, there are so many red flags flying all over the place. I'm done
Mhm.
with them. But with the frenemy, it's a very insidious thing
Mm.
where I can remember good times with that person and I can
Mhm.
remember when they were supportive and I can remember when they did nice things for me and I can remember when they had my back. But I can also remember when they undercut me. I can also
Mhm.
remember when I shared a positive thing that happened in my life and they were not truly happy for me. I can remember times when they were being fake and phony, and it was obvious to me, but they wouldn't just outright admit it. So to me, the frenemy is someone who walks the borderline between friend and enemy. So it's a little bit harder to cut that person off because you do have both positive and negative memories with that person.
And
Mm.
I think too,
Good.
one of the things that I was going to say, what you, Dr. Diana just said, reminded me like basically of a trauma bond, right? Like
Mm.
a friend of me can be a trauma bond, which basically means that you get the love bombing very early on and the attachment
Mm.
very early on. So then this is the person that you remember the good times with, that you may
Right.
have been friends with for a long time or whatever. And then you get to the point where now you're waiting or anticipating for those good times to come back.
Mhm.
And so sometimes, it's like, okay, well, every once in a while I get a sprinkling of who we used to be. And, I
Yeah.
had a friend of me that was a boss and it was it we were great at the beginning and then it took a turn and it was in my face, everything was good. Behind my back, she was, saying things to kind of sabotage me. And so
Right.
it can definitely be a sticky situation there as well.
There was
Absolutely.
something that I
Oh.
also was thinking about with Dr. Diana and Lavanya was talking about. Like, oftentimes we put the focus on what the other person is doing, what that frenemy is doing.
Mhm.
But sometimes we also need to do a heart check with ourselves. What
Mhm.
keeps us from cutting this person off? Like, what are the things that keep us rooted in this relationship? What fears do we need to challenge in order to start cutting the cord with those relationships? Because
Right.
oftentimes we only focus on like what the other person benefits from us, but what are we benefiting from the relationship? Why do we continue to
Mhm.
remain in that? Will we stay in a relationship because that person has another level of access? They can take us to our dreams a lot quicker. They can help us
Mm.
with a promotion, or maybe they can help us get into certain social circles. So when we're thinking about those types of relationships, it's not only what the person is doing to us, but also how are we maintaining that relationship as well.
Right, absolutely. Well, as I was listening to all three of you speak about, frenemies in those examples, I thought of an example of my own. I've had maybe a couple of frenemies, but once I kind of figured it out, I was like, all right, something ain't right. This is not what we want here. But I think about a friend that I had several years ago when I first moved away from home, and I had a homegirl, and she was from Harlem, and I mean, I thought she was cool, and we would have so much fun together, right? I used to love to dance and stuff like that. She's from Harlem, so she could dirty wine and do all these different things, and we just would have a good time, just turning up, tearing up the dance floor. But and so of course, when I'm a friend to someone, I kind of like treat them like their family, right? And I'm like down for you, right? I'm overprotective, all that stuff. So I was all those things. But as time went on, I'm like, this might not be a good friend, because she was a little shady, she used to lie a lot. And I'm like, wait, and I don't like liars. And I'm like, why is she lying? It just didn't make any sense. Then the next thing you know, she's like, oh, you got a crush on this person. I'm like, yeah, because we used to work with the guy, thought he was cute. And she was just like, yeah, you should totally talk to him. And then the next thing you know, she's she messed with him and she was married. I was like, wait a minute. what is going on here? And so eventually it was just like, okay, well, I don't want to keep this up because I could, if I was going to be like toxic too and be like, oh, okay, you're going to do me like that. I'm going to do the same thing to you and be tit for tat. But I was just like, no, like this is not the kind of relationship I want. So I had to cut it off. But in some of those cases, a lot of times it was something, obviously that person who's a friend of me, they have something that that they like about you and they want to keep getting. And if we're honest, there's something that we like about them, that is preventing us from really like I guess seeing it. And so, but I don't want to jump too far ahead. So let's get into our next question, which is, what are some of those signs that you have a frenemy?
I don't
So,
know.
yeah, well, go ahead, Sierra. It looks like you ready.
I was like some of those signs we've already talked about, right?
Yeah.
So an individual may show up in a certain way and then they start like speaking lies behind your back, or maybe even taking your information and spreading it to other people, like doing those things that are obviously toxic and unhealthy. So I just wanted to reiterate some of the things that we had already
had mentioned. Yeah, I know we kind of just jumped, I guess, a little bit ahead. I did look up, I think it's called, The Cut, right? And they were just talking about that. And I think we mentioned most of these things, but just to kind of cover the talking behind your back. That's something I think in a lot of cases, some people will just accept that because it's just like, okay, we're messy, right? And it's just like, but wait, how far is too far, right? You're like, well, we're all friends. So of course we're gonna, talk, about what's going on with the other person, especially those friend groups, because some people it's a threesome. They have a few different friends that they all hang out together. But it's just kind of like, at what point is the talking, like, where's the line, right? Because if it's 4 of us and we're friends, or 3 of us and we're friends, it's just like, okay, how do you know when it's just like, okay, this is a little like too much, right? Like some of these conversations you may not need to be having. And I think some people, they're kind of unclear with it, or they don't see anything wrong with some of that. Let me see. Oh, this one was good. They're always asking for favors. So they're always asking for favors from you, but then when you need them, then they're not able to come through for you. They're just like, oh, I'm sorry, I'm so busy. But somehow, some way, they always got a fresh ask for you. And so I think that one was pretty interesting. And then this other one, and then we'll kind of go into our next question. Their emotional needs consistently outweigh yours. So that one is interesting because I don't know if you guys have ever been in a situation like this, but where it's kind of like, always having something that they need from you. But when we talk about emotional needs, this person is like, I don't want to say emotionally unstable, but they, kind of put all this on you. And when you can't have an off moment because you're the friend who is always the fixer, right? And so I don't know if you guys have ever had that kind of experience where it's just like, okay, the brunt of the relationship is kind of like you're carrying it. And heck, that might be even in a romantic relationship sometimes.
Well, that's important to kind of think about when you're like in that I think that would be one of those covert kind of situations, right? Where that person is maybe not, they're so self-involved that they don't even know that they're not showing up. Now, sometimes they do know, of course, but I think, like, for example, like if you have that friend or that person that's heavy, I use the term heavy all the time, right? They always have an issue. They always have a situation or a circumstance, and they always want you to be there for them. But when you have a situation or circumstance, they can't be bothered in that area, or they can't be, they don't have the bandwidth for it. And so, but then the first time that you set a boundary to say, hey, you know what, I can't you know, X, Y, and Z. I'm dealing with my own things. Example, I had a friend that she always had issues. And
Mhm.
of course, her issues, I didn't necessarily consider them hard issues,
Mhm.
but they were always something that was just so detrimental to her, right?
Right.
And then when I was going through my divorce, and I was heavy, and I needed someone to be that support for me,
Mhm.
then she wasn't that person for me, you
Mhm.
know? And so I had to realize that I don't think this person was intentional about that aspect
Mhm.
of it. But it's just the self this like they're so self-centered that
Mhm.
they're not even consciously aware of that aspect. And one of
Right.
the other aspects that I wanted to add, just one of a characteristic, is this person one ups you, right?
Mhm.
And so this person is a person that you tell a story or you tell something that's going through, and they're like, oh, that happened to me. Or, oh,
Mhm.
you know, this is what,
Mhm.
you know, and that person who always has, you know, a story where, you know, if you got in a car accident, then they, you know, got hit by a helicopter. And if you, you know, it's always like this
Yeah.
something that's bigger to get the
Mhm.
attention off of. So you were telling them your story, you were kind of doing that, and now all of a sudden the conversation has shifted to what's going on with them and
Right.
their circumstance. And a person who does that constantly could be, you know, a frenemy.
Right. When I was thinking about this topic, and how important it was just to have this conversation, um, I, was just like, okay, is this something that, is crucial? Could it be really harmful? And I guess I was just kind of like trying to discover that and researching different things. And then the story came out a little bit after, well, maybe I guess a couple months after I, came out with the title of that I wanted to cover it on Shanquilla Robinson. And then
Mm.
it really became important for me to discuss this topic, because I think that we don't realize how crucial it is. You hang on to, to different friends, and sometimes they're just not even your friends. And one thing I, notice, and I think it's really important too for young people, is because in this generation, this younger generation, the teens, early 20s, it's kind of like the fake culture is being celebrated. I feel like when we were young, like
Mhm.
it was all about being real, like, oh, you got to have real ones, around you. And I think people appreciate that. But this newer generation and the culture is kind of like everybody's flexing or posting for the gram,
Mhm.
everybody's on a vacation, some exotic vacation. And that's cool. I think vacations are amazing. Like, don't stop doing that. Enjoy yourself. But it's almost like, it's just fake, and you can be whoever you want to be on the internet. So much so people are willing to just go to people's homes. They don't know their last name, they just met them today.
Mhm.
They're going out of the country with strangers,
Mhm.
and they're dying. I mean, and not just the situation with Shanquilla, but also there was another young lady, who, it was her roommate and the boyfriend, and they basically conspired and they murdered her. And it's just like, we don't really, you know, it's alarming, because, a lot of us have younger sisters, daughters, cousins, family members that are falling into this category. And it's happening, I think, a little bit too often. And I think we don't realize how alarming it is, the dangers in having these frenemies. And so I wanted to give you guys an opportunity to kind of like, talk about that, because to me, it's very disheartening to see, what has happened, to that, to Shanquilla and young,
Mhm.
girls like her.
Yeah. There's a couple things that I tell my clients all the
Mhm.
time, especially when it comes to interpersonal effectiveness skills and things of that nature, is that
Mhm.
trust takes time and time takes trust. But we
Mm.
live in a society where we don't take the time to learn how to trust not only ourselves,
Mm.
but trust other people. And so, like, even with the word friend, it's important for individuals to identify their own core values when it
Mm.
comes to friendship. You know, what do you need from a friend? How can a person become your friend? How are you a friend to yourself? And so even when I'm working with clients and identifying those relationships, I break out the relationship onion. Understand that that first layer on the outside is a stranger. You can see them on the street, giving them a head nod, you know, keep it moving. Or you're scrolling and you see these individuals that you know absolutely nothing about. The next layer would be those professionals, right, who know us from a practical and tangible base. Like your therapist, you have your OBGYN, your PCP, all of those individuals who know information about you, but from a data perspective. Have your associates and your acquaintances. And I feel like those individuals often get the name friend immediately. And that's why it's important for us to slow down. With your acquaintances, these are individuals that you have met, whether it be at work or in social groups. So you know what they look like, you know who they hang out with, but you don't really truly know them. You don't have that intimacy that it takes to become a friend. And then with an associate after that, those are those individuals that you don't mind having your name attached to, right? So all of us on here, we're mental health professionals. Obviously, we haven't had the opportunity to get to know one another, but because of the fact that we're connected by this wonderful woman V, we can trust that, okay, well, maybe your credentials are solid.
Right.
Your character is good.
Yeah.
And after that, that's when we get to the meat of it, that friendship piece, identifying that. And then all of that is governed by your relationship with self. So once you know, how can I be a friend to me? And then you set that same caliber for other people, it's hard for you to be able to develop frenemies because you wouldn't be a frenemy to yourself.
Okay, drop the mic.
I definitely think Sierra made a lot of good points. I think too nowadays the art of making friends is one that has been lost because so many people are on technology and social media, and that creates a very false sense of intimacy because you're constantly seeing pictures and videos and reels, and you know, people will put all of their thoughts online. They'll put everything that's going on, their breakup, their makeups, everything is online. So you start to feel like you know the person, but the reality is you don't. So going back to what Sierra said, building the trust is important. And when it comes to specifically to Shanquella, I don't necessarily know all of the details of the case, but I do think one of the biggest mistakes people make is they assume a toxic friendship is the worst one you can have. But the research has actually shown what they call ambivalent friendships, which is the category a frenemy would fall into, tends to be worse for you because you don't know what you're getting. With a toxic friendship, it's easy to categorize and say, what? Oh no, I'm not going to, you know, Mexico or Puerto Rico or the Dominican Republic with that person. They don't like me. They're not my friend. But when it's an ambivalent friend, when it's a frenemy, it's easy to convince ourselves, well, yeah, you know, she's flawed or she can be shady, but at the end of the day, that's my girl, that's my boy. So a lot of times it's not terribly surprising when things like this happen because it's easy to tell. Like, let's say when you go to the nail salon, you know, you're getting a pedicure, they ask you, is the water too hot? You put your feet in, you immediately know, oh yeah, it's hot. You take it out. But what if it's warm hot? You kind of take some time where you're like, I think it's okay. It's the same thing with frenemies.
Or gradually heating up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So like the toxic friendship, it's easy to identify. You won't necessarily want to travel with someone like that. But with the frenemy, you kind of, oh, I guess it's okay. And then unfortunately in Shanquella's case, it ended up with her losing her life.
Yes, absolutely.
And that ambivalent friendship is so like, it's so important to understand that, right? It's so important to understand that aspect of it because like Dr. Diona said, like it is that you're in this constant high and low, right? You're in this constant, like your cortisol levels, your stress levels, like are kind of like, I'm on eggshells with this person. And it's like, if I do things quote unquote right, then we're good. But if I do something that kind of, you know, wrong or misstep, and sometimes you don't even know where that misstep is, right? And if you've been in a place where dysfunction has been your norm, you don't even know that it's not normal. You don't
Right.
even know what a healthy friendship looks like because you've used to that. You've been in relationships where it's constant turmoil. If you grew up in a family with your mother and father constantly fighting, or where your parents yelled at you all the time, and that's how they,
Mhm.
we curse each other out, and that's how we show each other love. Like
Mhm.
those are toxic and dysfunctional kind of mentalities. But if that's been your norm, you don't know it's not normal. So when you get into a friendship like that, then you think it's okay to
Mhm.
constantly have these friendships where we break up and get back together constantly,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Or what I call fragile friendships, where they're so precarious. I don't know what's going on this day or that day. And we get into these kind of scenarios or situations. But you think about, I mean, the movie Mean Girls, and I mean there's so many of those kind of movies where you'll do anything to be in the in crowd, right? You'll do anything to be there. And even if you think back into like with Black culture and like even like sororities or events or things like that, sometimes you
Mhm.
can see it in scenarios in those cases where you may have a person that or a friend group or whatever that looks like, where you had to do things to be in with this crowd or
Oh,
with this group.
yeah.
But then the bond is maybe more of a superficial bond because y'all went
Mhm.
through something together, and then
Mhm.
necessarily didn't get the actual level of the friendship, right? And
Mm.
then on social media, you get the highlight reels of people's life.
Mhm.
So social media can only tell you what I tell it, right?
Right.
But if depending on what I tell it, you think that you know me. And
Right.
so and then think about Facebook, we call them friends. Instagram, we call them followers, right? And
Right.
so it gives us this
Which is probably
illusion,
more accurate.
right?
Because
It's
the followers
followers,
is kind of
right?
like, that to me, there's some fakeness to that, right? Like, oh, you're just going along with whatever,
Right.
I mean, unless we're talking about leadership, but outside of that, if we're not talking about leadership and you're just following, that's fake, to an
Yeah.
extent, So I did want to kind of go into, or maybe segue into that, even what you were talking about, Lavanya, about what are some of these misconceptions about frenemies? I feel like for some folks, it's a gray area. So,
Hmm.
if you wanted to continue on, Lavanya, and talk about some of those misconceptions, and then we'll kind of go
Yeah.
around.
So a few of the misconceptions about frenemies is, one is that they don't always want to see you fail. They just don't want to see you succeed beyond their capacity.
Mm,
Sometimes they don't want to be left out or left behind.
mm,
So it's not necessarily that they're rooting for your failure. It's just, I don't want you to succeed beyond where I'm no longer relevant in your life, where I'm no longer the important person, or whatever that looks like, right? And so that could be that person that is that ambivalent friendship, that as
mm,
long as I'm doing better than you, things are good. But when you start doing better than me, then we're kind of in this competition. It's out of insecurities. And then that not everyone who disagrees with you is a frenemy. Like, the Bible says that blessed are the wounds of a friend and the kisses of an enemy. I mean, the wounds of the kisses of a enemy. And so basically it's saying that you want a friend that's going to tell you the truth.
mm,
Everyone that tells you the truth and it's a different than your truth doesn't
mm,
mean they're hating on you, right? And
mm,
sometimes we label someone as a hater or a frenemy, when in reality they're just giving us a hard truth that we don't want to listen to. And then the last one, I think, is to believe that we're at a place that we've either never been a
mm,
frenemy,
mm,
either like covertly been a frenemy, or that we're not even capable of being one, right?
mm.
Because we have to be self-aware enough to know. But
Right.
we've all had that moment where someone gets married and you want to you've been single for so long. Someone
Mhm,
gets pregnant and you've been struggling with infertility. Someone,
mhm.
and you get that moment of, and then
It's a
you have
lot
to,
for you. Yeah.
yeah, you have to
Yeah.
fight against that, to
Right.
really to remember, this is my friend, this, I want this person, and there's enough goodness to go around, right?
Right.
So I think that's a big misconception, is don't think that you're so far removed that you can't face some of those same feelings, but
Mm-hmm.
when you're self-aware, you're able to stop yourself before you go over that line.
Oh, good. That was good. That was good. Doctor, what are some of the misconceptions about frenemies?
I would say one big misconception is that it's always obvious when a person is a frenemy.
Mm-hmm.
There are some people who are very, very good at hiding the way they truly feel about you. And sometimes it's weeks, months, years later that you're finding out who that person really was to you. And
Yeah.
I've personally experienced that where when I'm friends with someone, I'm loyal, I'm committed to that person. I want the best for that person. And sometimes I would just miss it. So people would say,
Mm-hmm.
didn't you think that when they said this, it was a little shady? Or didn't you think that was
Right.
passive aggressive? And it was easy to make excuses. Oh, well, that's just the way that they talk. Or,
Right.
they've had a rough upbringing, like just making allowances and making excuses.
Mm-hmm.
And then it came to a head where I finally had to recognize this person only reaches out when they need something.
Mm-hmm.
Literally, anytime they reached out, it was transactional. I was the emotional ATM. They were
Mm-hmm.
going to make withdrawals. And then
Mm-hmm.
after they made the withdrawal, they would disappear from my life. So
Mm-hmm.
sometimes a frenemy isn't obvious.
Mm-hmm.
Another misconception that I think sometimes people do about frenemies is not recognizing there are certain things people say and do that passive aggressiveness, it still counts as being a frenemy. So a
Mm-hmm.
person who is constantly sarcastic, a person who's constantly making jokes. I was just kidding. Why are you being so sensitive? That still falls under being a frenemy because once
Mm-hmm.
again, there is a mixture of I'm your friend, I support you, I have your back, but
Mm-hmm.
at the same time, I'm constantly undercutting, undermining you.
Right.
um, and then I would also say maybe one more misconception is that if a person is a frenemy, that means they can never want good things for you. No,
Mm-hmm.
the person can be ambivalent themselves. Going back to what Lavanya said, sometimes we may feel like only other people can be frenemies, but we can also be frenemies to people.
Mm-hmm.
It starts with having insight, reflecting,
Mm-hmm.
go to therapy to figure out what are your hangups? What are the things you struggle with? Do you struggle with envy? Do you struggle with jealousy? Do you struggle with, if someone else is happy and successful, then that diminishes me? Working on that, and then that's going to enable you to not be a frenemy to others, but also open your eyes as to who are those people you need to slowly, put some distance between yourself and them.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yes, Miss Sierra.
Immediately, I think about like the concept of labels and whatnot, and stages and phases.
Mm,
So I think a lot of people may look at the highs and lows of a relationship and immediately label it as a frenemy. And so it's
mm,
just a reminder that there are different seasons and phases in the lifespan of a friendship. And so just because you may be in a low space with your friend, don't
mhm,
automatically label them as a frenemy. Take some time to have those clarifying conversations or take some time to do that introspection, just like
mhm,
these ladies had mentioned, and look at patterns of behavior.
mhm,
I know we often say the proof is in the pudding, but as behaviorists, like it's important for us to look at the patterns of behavior because that serves as practical and tangible evidence of the shift in that relationship. And
right,
sometimes you may not even notice it immediately because of your own lens, your own core beliefs about friendship, your own beliefs about the concept of friendship. One of the layers in relationships that I didn't mention was family. And immediately when we think about family, we're thinking about
mhm,
the family that we're born into, the family, the
mhm,
people that we share genetic makeup with. But we also have family of choice. And those are
mhm,
the individuals who are friends who become deeper in a new way because of the fact that we've shared a lot of time together or because we've been through things together. And so recognize that it may be difficult for you to relinquish those relationships. And if you find yourself in a hard space, take some time to have those conversations. And I think also going on the theme of like phases and transitions and whatnot, getting comfortable with the uncomfortable times of a friendship as well. I think that's going to be a key component for individuals, or even with the challenging those misconceptions about friendships.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. That was so good.
Can I make a really quick comment? Sorry.
Sure. Sure.
What Sierra just said about the phases of friendship, I think is so important, and understanding like kind of like seasons in life, right? Like your friendships, if they can sustain it, they will go through those seasons. And sometimes when you're in a winter of that season of that friendship, that's when things are changing. That some certain parts of the friendship, we're older, you get you're both single at the time, so y'all were able to spend time together and talk all day every day, and then someone gets married and then has kids, and now that friendship has to evolve, and that person who's not married and who doesn't have kids, now they start to they can start to think, oh well, this person's not there for me anymore, this person. But it's just that the season has kind of shifted in one person's life, and being able to get through that winter to understand that spring will bring something maybe more beautiful. I gave the example of the friend that wasn't there for me in my divorce. And it was because I was heavy. And I admit, like, I knew, like, I got tired of myself. Like I was heavy. And so I knew, and especially when I was going through that mindset of that mentality of when I knew I should let go, but I wasn't ready to walk away yet. And I kept having the same exact conversations over and over again. And I needed someone just to listen. And that friend wasn't able to be there, but another friend emerged. And this is a friend that became that support for me in that time frame. And now both of them are still my really good friends. And it's just that that winter birthed something different in our friendships, and we were able to kind of get through that. And so not labeling that person or them as a frenemy, but just being able to say, this is a different season. So I love that you said that, Sierra, because that is so important. And sometimes we give up in those seasons. Now, I'm not saying that you should stay through a season of trauma or toxicity or anything like that, but when things are changing and shifting, you have to recognize that.
Absolutely. I think one thing that I got to learn over time, or a misconception maybe I had, is that there was a time frame or an age limit on this frenemy thing. I remember when I was younger and overhearing a conversation where my mom was talking to my stepdad about some things, and I think I was in high school, and I'm like, that still goes on? Like, you guys are grown, like what? And she's like, yes, there's some people who are messy, far into, adulthood. And it's just like, what? And I think some people think that they're like, okay, when you think of frenemies, you're thinking of like Mean Girls. You were thinking about elementary. And of course, we would hope that we would graduate to not behave that way, right? And to not, keep up the mess or whatnot. That's high school or whatnot. But it's still, as you guys have mentioned, like if you have that, you don't have that awareness and you haven't taken out that time to kind of like discover those boundaries and grow, then you will still act like that. You will still be toxic, as a 50-year-old, or a 60-year-old. And it's kind of sucks, but like that's the real. But that's one of those that I felt like was kind of a misconception as well.
And I would add to that, V. I think one of the biggest lies we've been sold is that with age comes maturity. That is a bald-faced lie. Maturity means doing work. And a lot of times people don't want to do the work. They want the people around them to change, but they don't want to change.
That's good.
But the reality is, if you want to have maturity, you have to be able to look at yourself, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And nowadays, people don't want to look at the ugly.
They don't. They
Like
do.
getting older is not a choice. Maturing is, right? Like
Yeah.
we all get older, but we don't all grow up, and we have to realize
Mhm.
that.
Mhm.
So, y'all, what would be the motivation? What is the motivation to be a frenemy? Any- What? Go ahead, doctor.
You asked that question, and I'm like, I'm not sure if I would look at it as a motivation. I think
Uh-huh.
it's more of, and this isn't going to sound psychological, it's going to sound a little spiritual. I think it's
Okay.
a heart issue.
Yeah.
I
Mm.
think that a lot of people deep, deep down inside are not satisfied with themselves, where they are in life. They're constantly comparing. They feel
Mm.
inadequate. They feel inferior. They feel worthless.
Hmm.
So, whenever they're around other people, they're constantly mentally keeping score
Yeah.
and
Mm.
they don't even recognize they're a frenemy.
Right. I was
So,
gonna say that. Do they
Hmm.
even know? You
yeah,
know.
yeah, that's what I was going to say. I currently have that issue with someone who I've been friends with, and the denial is so thick you can't cut it with a knife. Like it's just there's no awareness at all
Yeah.
that they are passive aggressive or that they're not genuinely happy for others' successes. It
Hmm.
doesn't matter how many times you have the conversation, there's always a reason for why they responded the way that they responded. So I don't think anyone explicitly goes into it saying, I'm going to be a frenemy to this person.
Hmm. Hmm.
It's more of a lot of times they have their own issues going on deep down inside that is not resolved. They won't
Hmm.
go to therapy. They won't reflect. They won't take constructive feedback, as both these ladies pointed out, something
Hmm.
that you need to get from your friends. So, what ends up happening is they live in this bubble where they're always the victim and everyone else is always the villain.
Right.
Ugh, that's so crazy because I actually had, that, well, I've had that experience for some time. And it's just like, it's kind of like, it starts bubbling up like, this is, I'm going to have to let this person go. And I know that we're going to, kind of cover and how to do that. But just like you were saying, doctor, it just made me think of that. It's just like, when you have someone that you call a friend and that been a friend to, and then you start to notice these things, or maybe it wasn't really showing up, beforehand. And then now, it's just like more frequent, you're having these issues. And yeah, I don't think that they even know, sometimes that that's what they're, being, because I don't know if they're self-absorbed, in their own world of what's going on with them. And, there's a desperation. But yeah, it's real, as you mentioned. Um, Lavanya, were you going
I
to?
think Sierra was gonna speak. I'll speak after her. Go ahead,
Okay,
Sierra.
you both had you guys look ready. I was like,
Um, Immediately when I heard the question, what would make you become a frenemy, or why would you go into a
motivation.
relationship becoming a frenemy?
Mhm.
I like from a trauma lens, immediately like what happened to you for you
Mhm.
to utilize this behavior?
Mm.
What happened to you for you to choose this mode of existence as a way to regulate your emotion, your friendships? Like, why do you
Mm.
show up in your friendships this way? And so immediately I think about what Lavanya had mentioned earlier in terms of the fact that, like, what relationships did you have that taught you the foundation for friendships? Because if
Mm.
you weren't exposed to healthy, genuine, intimate relationships where
Mhm.
there's a mutual exchange between individuals, where you can show up authentically and you don't have to defend yourself, or you don't have to worry about being judged, and vice versa, it's difficult for you to replicate that in other areas of your life, whether it be with yourself, with your friends, with your family, whoever. And so immediately I think about what happened to you for you to lean fully into that particular way of being in your friendships.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's
So
good.
good, Sierra. And that's kind of along the same lines that what I was gonna say. And there's a term, and I'm drawing a blank for it, but I'm gonna just call it secondary benefits because I don't know if that's a term or not. But it's basically saying that it's something that happened to you, but you get a benefit from it. So, for example, a person who had an accident and they may now use a wheelchair, right? That's a trauma that happened to them, but the benefit is now they get a handicap place to park, right? Now, of course, this person would always trade the parking in front of the building for use of their legs, but it's considered that secondary benefit to the trauma, right? And so the same thing with someone that grew up having to compete or fight. And sometimes what happened to you is that it happened, when you were growing up. If you grew up with siblings, then maybe you were always told, why aren't you like this one? Why don't you act more like this one? And so your parents inadvertently created that frenemy kind of trait in you, or you were the person that was always compared to, right? Sometimes we always think about the person that said, why can't you be like this person? But what about the person who was always on the pedestal? And so now this person has to be perfect because now everybody's being compared to them. And so now that motivation to always be up there has been ingrained in you, right? And so that what happened to you, now we know what happened to you. And then it's like, okay, but until you recognize that it's something that can heal, that's kind of like when people say, this is just the way I am, that is killing your relationships. Because just because that's the way you have always been doesn't mean that it's healthy and doesn't mean that you have to stay that way, right? And so some people say, well, this is just, I have a person that is in my life, and everyone around this person is just like, oh, that's just, let's call her Ann. That's just Ann. And everyone just accepts that Ann is a word that I won't use on this live. And everyone just accepts that. And it's like, okay, when Ann is in one of her moods, you kind of, go away from her. But when she's not, then you want to, and it's just like understanding, Ann, like every other week you're in a trauma with someone else, or you're in an argument with someone else, but you're always
stirring up some stuff.
Yeah, you're always the victim. Are you sure? And so the motivation, so sometimes I think the motivation can be taking the spotlight off of them to me. So it's kind of like growing up, if you say, well, this person did something, like, well, she did it too, right? And so, or if you bring up where someone else is failing or where someone else is doing something, then that takes the spotlight off of where you're not in your life and what you're not doing in your life. So it's kind of around the family table at Thanksgiving. If I can get you talking about the drama of my sister or the drama of my uncle or my auntie's fourth husband, then I don't have to talk about where I didn't finish school or where I didn't do that, And so sometimes that can be a motivator too, is not, I don't necessarily want to hurt you. I just don't want the attention on me.
Oh, that's good. Immediately I was thinking about pairing, but both what Dr. Diana and Lavanya was talking about in terms of like the benefit to being a frenemy is the fact that you are not required to change. When your identity is rooted and ingrained in utilizing these tactics, and nobody is challenging you on those behaviors because they just accept you for who you are, you don't have to do the work to change. And so because nobody's holding me accountable, and remember, accountability is not about consequence, it's about ownership.
Right.
When people in your life aren't holding you accountable and challenging you to change so that we can grow together, those are the benefits. Everybody loves change until it becomes inconvenient. So just like what Dr. Diana talked about in terms of like doing that heart work, when you don't have to do the hard work, when you don't have to start assessing yourself, and I could just start, being manipulative, or I can start making sure that you stay on the same level as me because I'm not doing the work. I think that's one of the benefits of operating in that space.
That's so interesting too. So with that being said, what about why keep them around? Because I feel like some of the reasoning, the motivation, and then the keeping them could be similar, but why keep them around? Is it do you all think that there might be some type of avoidance with that as well on that side of it?
Yeah. I definitely think for me, two reasons I think that someone can keep a friend. Why? What someone would keep a friend of me around is one is because they perpetuate the feelings that you have about yourself. So if you're insecure, if you haven't done the hard work of knowing who you are, and you believe that you don't deserve healthy relationships, then that frenemy, it basically confirms what you already believe, right? You believe that dysfunction is the norm. You believe that you have to have constant highs and lows. You believe that the person who loved you the most can hurt you the most, and that's just the way it goes. Yeah, and so you start not doing the hard work and just saying, okay, well, this is something, like, this is just how friendships work, or this is just how relationships work, or their family, and you just gotta love them. Yeah, you can love them, but you can leave them as well. And not understanding that, that aspect of it. So I think that's one of the reasons. And then also I wouldn't say necessarily a benefit of keeping them around, but something that could be seen as a benefit is sometimes the delivery is wrong, but the message may be right. So I say, eat the meat, but spit out the bones, right? So sometimes a frenemy, even though they're constantly negative, sometimes something that they may say may be something that you may have had some yes people around your life, or some friends that didn't know how to be as honest with you as they wanted to be. And even though the frenemies, the motive behind it is wrong, sometimes there may be some meat in there that you can take from it.
That's good. That's good. Sierra?
I don't necessarily see the benefit, but I can see like why a person would want to keep the friend around or the frenemy around. One, like we talked about, the avoidance piece that challenges an individual to have those difficult conversations. And so if you struggle to be passive in most of your relationships, and you don't know how to effectively articulate your own wants and needs because you haven't sat down to be able to identify your wants and needs in relationships, it might create anxiety in order to have those relationships. Also, there are some fears that individuals may have with letting that relationship go, especially for my clients or individuals who deal with anxiety. The idea of what will life look like without this person here. This is all I know. Even though they treat me wrong, or maybe I've had these negative experiences with this individual, I am romanticizing the good times, even if they're few and far and in between. And so what would life look like if I don't even have those little bitty breadcrumbs in my life?
The bread, and they are
security in that dysfunction, right?
Exactly.
Because even though I know I'm gonna get everything else on this plate, at least I know they're also going to give me this little bit. And where am I going to find that little bit from?
Right. Or the person who knows. To me, I think, as well as hanging on to that, friend that, a lot of this stuff is more so draining you, but it's that, well, they know everything. Like, they've been around for so long. They know all, they know the history. I don't have to start from scratch and tell them about this person. It's just like, remember Rashawn from 2010, girl, he called me, or whatever it is. Like, you don't have to start over. It's sometimes you're kind of hanging on to that history, So
very much so, very, very much so. And it's kind of like dating, right? When you get tired of being on these apps and tired of telling your story over and over and over, or even depending on what age bracket you're in, it may be difficult for you to start building healthy relationships. But we have to push past that fear of uncertainty. And even what Lavanya said, just trust the fact that you are the bomb.com and that you will attract those healthy relationships. It may take a longer time to cultivate those healthy relationships, but trust that you're worth the journey.
Absolutely. Dr. Diona.
I had what Sierra just said made me think of a conversation I had with a guy that was trying to date me, but it was no. And so, but his mentality was, well, me, you've been with me, for couple months or several months or whatever that looks like. And even though you're not getting your needs met, you know me. And so if you let me go, this was his selling point, y'all. I'm telling
That's
y'all.
what I was like. Is that the
This is your advertisement, bruh. And so, but
I'm
even
familiar.
so if you let me go, you'll be single. And who's to say 6 months from now you'll still be single? I said, but if I stay with you 6 months from now, I'm guaranteed not to have my needs met, right?
Mm.
So at least if I get away from you, if I let you go, then there's a chance that I will get my needs met in 6 months. But if I stay with you, I am guaranteed not to get my needs met, right? And so that mentality when we stay in a relationship, a frenemy relationship, is I know I'm not getting what I need, but it's familiar. And if I let this go, I'm scared. But the reality, we have to flip it and say, I know a year from now, I'm still not going to get my needs met in this friendship, in this relationship. So I'd rather take my chances and letting this go and not build a solid friendship with someone else yet in that year. But now I'm learning that I'm worthy of it, even if I don't see it in my life yet. Right,
which is a benefit, in itself. Absolutely. Dr. Diona, what about you as far as the why keep them around? And then I'd ask a question in the audience, and we'll come right back to that.
Okay. What I was going to say is my reasons for keeping the frenemy around were two-part. You kind of touched on this earlier, V, when you talked about history. It's someone that I've known for a long time, and it hasn't all been negative.
Right.
And I think the second part for me is I was raised in a Caribbean Christian household. So there's a lot of cultural and religious values that play into my decision, where, you're taught about love and forgiveness and giving people a second chance and considering, what's going to happen if that friendship ends. How is it going to affect them? How is it going to affect the family? How is it going to affect your relationship at work, school, church, or wherever it is that you interact with them? So for me, it's not as simple as, oh, you're a friend of me, you're out. It's more of a, if I do this, what are going to be the repercussions that follow?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's so good. Because it's just like the friends too. If you guys share friends, then it's just like, so what do we do? Just kind of like act like, carry on, like it didn't happen, or is it a secret? Like, just that whole ordeal.
Or if it's a family member, right? Like say it's a family member and now you've limited your access to this person or their access to you, then what does that look like? Because this person is going to tell a story about what happened, right? And typically it's not going to be the most accurate story, or it's going to cast them as the victim or cast you as the villain or whatever that looks like. So I definitely see what Dr. Diona is saying, is that it has to, depending on the relationship of this person, it has to be it is a calculated risk. It's a calculated decision to make in that aspect, to say, okay, when I hit this domino, where are the other ones going to fall, and how does that look for in the future, right?
That's true. That is so true, y'all. Someone asked in the audience, let's see. Oh, it was Lady D. Oh, so my question is, how did the toxic, dysfunctional person get to be your friend in the first place? I mean, from my perspective, I would say that they didn't show up that way, and I'll give you the side eye because I think I'm a good read. But if this person was being your friend since you were young and dumb, then that would be what I would say. I mean, like how the person got into, because at this point in my life, you can't get in, showing up, toxic, like, or even showing up as, ambivalent, as you were saying. Like there's some signs, I think, that people, even as much as they want to cover it up, they can't cover it up, because give them a week. Now people's tolerance these days and their flip-floppiness is just showing up so quickly that it's just like, at this point, you just had to have your eyes closed, your ears closed, everything just sleep, to to have these
Right.
people in your life, at a certain point. But if anyone wants to answer that question, how did the dysfunctional person make it in your life, or how do they just make it in your life?
I mean, a person doesn't always show their true colors immediately. We
Yeah,
often bond over shared interests, over shared beliefs, organizations, hoods, neighborhoods, things of that nature, social settings and groups. And
mhm.
so you get opportunity to come together, and then you start hanging out with that individual. Then over time, the representative falls to the wayside. And
Right.
so kind of like what we talked about earlier, it's just like you always don't see the true colors of a person immediately. Nobody, rarely, I don't want to say anybody, but not many people show up as their authentic self.
Right.
And so,
Yeah.
And then it could be association too.
Mhm.
Like you this is a coworker or this is a friend of a friend. We all have these friend circles where there's friends on the fringes, right? Where I'm friends with this person, but then this person is friends. So that's 6 degrees of separation. So that person could be that toxic person that kind of, now we're in the same circles and we're hanging out so many times. It's very rare, like Sierra said, that someone's going to come up and say, you know what, I'm going to wreck your credit, wreck your car, wreck your hat, your
Ugh,
peace, and and your diet. But hey, you want to be friends? Like, nobody shows up. Cool, let's do it.
right.
Nobody shows up in that kind of mentality because it's easy to see that and to say, unless you're operating from dysfunction and you believe that that's healthy or you believe that that's normal. Let me say that. Because sometimes we recognize that this person is not necessarily healthy, but we don't know what healthy looks like. And so we accept this because this is what we've always been accepted. But I think toxic or ambivalent or frenemies, many cases grow. They don't start off that way. They
Right.
grow. They grow into that.
Absolutely, I think so too. I know we're getting we're over the hour, but we do want to offer some resolutions, some help.
Please
And
help us.
yeah, some people wear masks. Absolutely. I mean, we got good at that. We were good at wearing
We all
masks
do.
before the pandemic. So we're always
Some of us
learning.
never took them off, honey. Never took 'em off.
Exactly. And so our last question is, how do we learn to let go of frenemies? Because obviously, if it was something easy to do, you wouldn't have them, right? You would notice it and you'd be like, bye, but I think we kind of touched on why keeping them around, but like, how do you let them go? Like, is there some
Mhm.
steps, like help us,
I
y'all.
think so. A couple of things for me
Okay.
is how to let them go. One, as Sierra and Dr. Deanna said about knowing yourself, right?
Okay.
Knowing who I am, what I need, and also what I give, right? Like doing that for like doing a friendship analysis on yourself and say, what kind of friend am I? What kind of friend do I need? What do I give in a friendship? And what do I need to receive in a friendship? So
Mhm.
now, many times, if we don't know where that standard is, then it's easier for us to accept things that kind of slip through because we don't know yet. So
Right.
taking that time to really get to know yourself and say, what do I need and what do I give? Am I the kind of friend that is going to be fair weather? Am I the kind of friend that I can't talk? I'm okay with not talking to you for a month, but when we talk, we catch up like, we just talked to yesterday. Or am I the friend that needs to talk every week? I used to
Mm.
have a friend that would call me, and if we didn't talk in 4 days, she would be like, hey, stranger, what? And she was like, it's been 4 days since we talked. And I was like, well, why didn't you call me? Oh, well, I was waiting for you to call me. We're not doing that.
Right.
So, and so like knowing what you need and what you need, and then understanding boundaries, right? When,
Okay.
if you, the book by Dr. Henry Cloud and Robert Townsend, I think,
Yeah.
John Townsend.
Mhm.
It's called Boundaries. Please read the book, like eat the book. And it talks about boundaries, right? And one of the things that he mentions that makes boundaries so clear is that you would not go to your neighbor and build a fence around their yard. You build a fence around your yard, right? So
Mhm.
many times we mess up in boundaries because we start telling people what they should and shouldn't do.
Mm.
No, a boundary is saying what I will allow access into my yard for,
Mm.
right? So I set a boundary for myself, and everybody gets the authentic me, but everyone does not get access to me, right? So a boundary limits that availability. So for those frenemies, for those people that are toxic in my life, those people that are whatever that looks like, right? Then I have a gate. And
Right.
my boundary says that if you do not do X, Y, and Z, then you stay outside of this gate, right? And then now your access to me is now limited. I accept you for who you are, but who you are is less than what I will accept as a friend. And that's setting a boundary, right? I'm not telling you to change. I'm simply saying that the way you are limits your access to me. And if we do those things, and then the last thing, recognizing that just because you have the same last name or bloodline does not mean that you have to be friends. I don't know how else to say it. That's the reality. Like, I've heard people say, I did a TikTok where it was like, basically, like, Usher, watch me. And it was like, you can't just cut family off. Watch me. Like, yes, if they are toxic, if they are at the point where I have to sacrifice my mental health for this, then it's the cost is too high.
Yeah.
So I think for me, those are ways that you can let go of frenemies and start to heal that.
Absolutely. And Sierra?
Immediately, sorry y'all if I get real clinical in this thing, but I immediately I partner mindfulness with communication, right? So not only are you assessing your needs, it's important for you to also identify the pros and cons of staying in this relationship. I think someone asked to what degree, like, how do you know when enough is enough? You decide that. You decide that. Okay, so if you have a high tolerance pain in terms of like emotion, then you need to reel it in and identify what is my threshold? What can I not accept in this relationship, and how do I move accordingly? And then in terms of like communication, after you identify your needs, if you ever get a chance, check out this acronym. It's called Dear Man. It's in dialectical behavior therapy, where essentially you're describing what happened or what took place and in the relationship, that particular offense or the particular problem at hand. Then you go ahead and you express how you feel, your emotions. But in order to express how you feel, you also need to know how you feel. So that's why that mindfulness piece is important. Utilize those feeling words. Take some time to find a feelings wheel so you can expand your feelings vocabulary. Then after you describe what happened and express how you feel, that's when you assert what's going on. And then you reinforce that thing, okay? And then for individuals who struggle with passive communication, it's okay. Take some time to reel it in, have a conversation with yourself, role play with a healthy relationship. Take some time to stand in the mirror and prepare for that conversation and increase your mindfulness. And then also when we're talking about moving forward, make sure that you grant patience and grace to yourself. Because the removal of a relationship out of your life, there's going to be some grief that you're going to experience as well. So allow yourself to navigate all of those stages of grief as you are removing or after you have already removed that person from your life. Ways to address the grief upon removing a person after your life: surround yourself with positive and healthy relationships. Find other supportive resources out there. Read books on how to establish healthy boundaries. Dive into that personal development. Increase meditation. When we think about meditation, it's more than just sitting there and like having a clear mind. Like if you need to partner that with your own personal spirituality, do that thing. But it reminds me of like in the scripture where the man, he removed the demon and that demon left. Came back with 7 more. The only reason why that demon came back with 6 or 7 more was because there was an emptiness. So when you're moving those toxic relationships out of your life, start to fill yourself with things that are going to help you to stay strong.
Yeah, and it's like that was good to have that support on standby, right? So if you're going to, you're like, all right, this is what I'm going to do. Have that support so that like when those demons come back, you can fight them off, So Dr. Diona.
I think that Lavanya and Sierra hit the nail on the head. I think the only thing that I would add is get a therapist, because a lot of times when we allow frenemies in our life, it starts with us and what it is about ourselves that we need to change, whether it's becoming more assertive, whether it's setting boundaries. A person doesn't just walk into your house. You have to leave the doors unlocked. Why do you do that? What is that about? Is it that you're used to narcissistic borderline people and now this feels normal to you? Unpacking all of that in therapy will make it that much easier for you to let go of frenemies.
Absolutely. That's so good. When you said that, it starts with you. I thought about, and I didn't mention this, but, I think about frenemies. You could have a frenemy when you were a kid. Just think about those times when there was someone who had long hair or the pretty girl, whatever, and someone did something to their face or they put gum in their hair. It's like, those are those little things that probably should have been swept under the rug. But, once you start getting used to this kind of like, I guess, abusive behavior, whether it's emotional, abuse, or mental, you're like, this has been with me the way, the things that you've let them go for a long time, for years. So the therapy it's great so that you kind of address like, why are you allowing, this kind of relationships, in your life in the first place. So, anywho, that was great. You guys, this is such a great show. I think that there's a lot of note taking. I was taking notes over here too. But I want to go ahead and allow you guys to share your social media handles and how our audience can get in contact with you. So Dr. Diona, I'll start with you so you can share your handles and social media information.
All right. So I blog at www.drdiona.com. I also have my private practice website, augustinspsychology.com. And on IG, you can find me at Dr. Diona. We're also on IG at the Mental Health Sistas. That's SISTAS. And then we're on Twitter at Dr. Diona, as well as at TMHS Official. So that's the Mental Health Sistas Official.
Awesome. And Lavanya?
Yes, you can contact me. Sorry, I got out of the thing. Getting back to it. You can contact me at Lavanya R. Tryon on all social media platforms. So that is Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, as well as my blog is www.lavanyartryon.com.
Awesome. And Miss Sierra?
Yes, you can visit my website, legacyspks.com. You can also find me on all social media platforms, Legacy SPKS. And you can also find my YouTube channel where I also focus on interviews with other mental health clinicians of color at Legacy Speaks. And you can also tap in via mentalhealthgoals.com where you can receive a free mental health action plan there.
Oh, awesome. It's so good. All righty. Well, I wanted to say thank you, all three of you, Dr. Diona, Sierra, and Lavanya, for joining me this evening to talk about frenemies. We need more of this. We have to kind of just have these conversations. I think a lot of the times we're like, okay, well, I'm struggling, with these different areas, in our lives or topics and discussions, but it's just good to have, that support, basically to kind of like help you tackle it head on. So thank you so much for joining us this evening. And for my audience, thank you guys for always showing up and be in the comments, and we'd love to see more of you guys next time. So anyways,
thank you, V. This has been amazing.
Yes, have a great night. And till next time, we'll be back.
Thank you, ladies.
Bye.